I am T.L. Brink. My co-author is Victoria Carolyn. We are from Crafton Hills College of the San Bernardino Community College District. Our research is on willpower and temptation during COVID-19. We did a Bayesian study of internet searches. Temptation is usually defined in the context that people should not tempt God, Christ, or the Holy Spirit. In the New Testament, there's also a great deal of discussion of Satan tempting Christians. Christians are supposed to pray that they are not led into temptation, but delivered from evil. There is a great deal of trust that God will not allow Christians to be tempted excessively, that God will always have a way for Christians to escape or avoid temptation, or at least be able to bear it. On the other hand, there is an indication that enduring temptation is a virtue that will be rewarded. From a psychological perspective, temptation is a stimulus. Willpower is an organismic capacity, and the ability to resist temptation would be the response made by the organism. The APA dictionary defines temptation as a stimulus that facilitates a desire to behave in a certain way, especially in a way contrary to one's own or society's standards of behavior. Psychologists understand willpower as a way of resisting the immediate demands of certain lower-level needs or impulses, so that the individual may attain higher levels of needs or duties that may provide a better long-term payoff, or meet with social approval, or be more altruistic or moral. The APA dictionary defines willpower as the ability to carry out one's intentions, and is related to the concepts of self-control, self-discipline, self-regulation, and to delay of gratification, and Bandura's concept of individual agency. It is related to the Big Five personality trait of conscientiousness. Within positive psychology, willpower is related to Dweck's growth mindset and Duckworth's grit. Positive psychology has also studied willpower as something that can be measured and modified. Religiosity is not about which religious tradition one adheres to, but about how religious one is. Religiosity varies by country and by state. Gebauer found that religiosity has psychological benefits, but only in those societies where religiosity is seen as a virtue. During the time of COVID-19's lockdown, people were told to stay within their own bubble and frequently did not meet other family members. Seisler found that COVID-19 and the lockdown have exacerbated depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation. The guiding questions for our research were, did people understand the stresses of the COVID lockdown in terms of temptation or lack of willpower? did the trend shift over the course of the COVID lockdown? What demographic factors, such as religiosity, influenced the trend? Our first hypothesis was that there would be a seasonal trend of willpower and temptation searches on the internet, being more prominent at the beginning and end of the calendar year, right around the holidays. Our second hypothesis was that internet searches for both willpower and temptation will increase during the COVID-19 lockdown. Our third hypothesis was that willpower searches will be more prominent in less religious localities. And our fourth hypothesis was that temptation searches will be more prominent in more religious localities. We used Google Trends, a free service since 2012 that measures the volume of searches by month or week using an index of 0 to 100. What Google Trends gives us is not the absolute number of searches during a given time period or at a given place, but rather the 100 index is set at the maximum period of searches, and other time periods are set in proportion to that. So it gives us a relative comparison of time periods. We can also do a geographical comparison between countries, states, or even metropolitan areas. So therefore, our geographical data would be aggregated data for each particular state plus the District of Columbia. In this way, we were able to correlate Google Trend searches for willpower and temptation to various demographic variables coming from the U.S. Census or the CDC. Variables such as population density, college degrees, per capita income, ratio of unmarried males to females, and various Pew measures of religiosity. Our Google Trend searches could cover all the way from 2004 through 2020, and each would be this set ratio at 100 as the maximum. We look specifically for searches for temptation and willpower. For data analysis, we use JASP, and specifically, we used Bayesian sequential analysis to find out how statistical significance might change with the addition of new cases. This is what willpower searches looked like from 2004 through the end of last year. Notice we have a peak in 2012, right around the time of the publication of Baumeister's book. However, in comparison with temptation searches greatly outpaced willpower and had numerous periods for peaks of temptation searches. Now, there's various ways of looking at the correlation between temptation searches and willpower searches. We looked at the chronological periods as our data set, pre-COVID and chronological periods post-COVID, and we also looked at geographical data points. And so we got different correlation coefficients from that. When we looked at the chronological correlation between willpower and temptation searches pre-COVID, we found no significant correlation. We found even less of a correlation when we looked at the chronological periods post-COVID. When we looked at the correlations between willpower searches and temptation searches based upon the geographical locations as our data points, we found a slight negative correlation, 0.29. And when we looked at this from the various perspectives, we found that it was not statistically significant. Hypothesis 1 predicted a seasonal trend of willpower and temptation searches being more prominent at the beginning and the end of the calendar year. We looked at the 12 months and tried to see if there was a consistent monthly trend on willpower, and it appears that there was not. When we looked for temptation searches, we found that they were highest right after the holidays in the months of February, March, and April. These were perhaps marginally significant according to a Kruskal-Wallis test. Hypothesis 2 is that internet searches for both willpower and temptation will increase during the COVID lockdown. Now, we looked at the pre-COVID 44 weeks, March through December of 2019, as a comparison for the 44 weeks of the post-COVID lockdown, March through December of 2020. Here's what we found. We found higher mean searches for willpower after the COVID lockdown. But was the difference significant? We used the Wilcoxon test and then followed up with Bayesian robustness and Bayesian sequential analysis. Now we have fair significance according to the Wilcoxon test and traditional null hypothesis significance testing with p-values. But when we look at a Bayes factor robustness test, especially with the varying Cauchy prior width, we find that it's really not significant and does not give us enough evidence to favor the alternative hypothesis against the null. When we look at Bayesian sequential analysis over this period of 44 weeks, we find that it appears like we have some significance up until about week 33 of the lockdown, and then that significance seems to dissipate toward the end of the year. If we look at temptation, there certainly is a great deal more searches for temptation during the COVID lockdown period. And once again, we start with the non-parametric Wilcoxon test, and then we look at the Bayesian approaches as well. Here we have excellent significance according to the Wilcoxon test. And when we look at the Bayes factor robustness, once again we see very strong evidence for this alternative hypothesis. And it also passes the Bayesian sequential analysis. Significance does not dissipate after the 33rd week of the lockdown. Hypothesis 3 is that willpower searches will be more prominent in less religious communities. So we were able to correlate willpower and religiosity and found the inverse correlations that we had predicted. And this was true for each of the Pew measures of religiosity. Hypothesis 4 was that the temptation searches will be more prevalent in areas with religiosity. Although the correlations tended to be positive, they were small and not statistically significant. We found no correlations with other geographical factors, such as age, sex, the Gini index, or education levels. Let's remember that correlation, of course, does not equal causation. There are various possible relationships, including